With the upcoming NFL draft, the Steelers could pick a number of positions, but we've been looking at different mock drafts and different strategies the Steelers could employ. We're not going to try to be accurate necessarily with who the Steelers might pick. We're going to try and give you an outlook on a specific position and all the different players the Steelers could pick in every single round. Today, we're going to do an all wide receiver mock draft, picking for where the Steelers are in the NFL draft with all of their picks throughout this year and picking a wide receiver each time to give you a look at the type of player the Steelers could add to their receiver scores. Joining me today on the Locked On Steelers podcast will be Wes Uhler of Steeler Nation Radio. It's going to be a fun show. We'll talk about that, Tyrann Mathieu, what he said about the Pittsburgh Steelers, and even more right here. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button in the video if you enjoyed it. Hit the subscribe button on our channel to get all of our daily content, as well as our breaking news videos. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day. If you want to support the show, go on Apple Podcasts, leave us a 5-star review with a positive comment, and doing both at the same time, we'll get you a shout out at the end of the show. Joining me today, as I said before, is Wes Uhler, our main man. Wes, it's rare we get you on a Thursday. Normally we get you on a Wednesday for Wes Wednesdays. Sometimes it's been Wes Tuesdays, but we got you on a Thursday, and I think it's a fun way to have it too, because sometimes this Thursday's getting you right just for Fridays.
New day, same me. How about that?
Same fantastic hair, by the way.
Thanks for calling an audible for me this week. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. We switch things up. Sometimes people need different things. You can also listen to Wes on the Ears and Beers podcast with him and Adam Crowley, a guy we just had last week on, as they talk all things West Virginia sports. But Wes, let's get right down to brass tactics here. Now, we're not trying to break any news here. We're going to have a little fun with their conversation about what the Steelers could look at wide receiver. Now, as it stands, the Steelers really only have Chase Claypool and Deontay Johnson on their roster right now. Juju Smith-Schuster is a Kansas City Chief. James Washington is a Dallas Cowboy. And Ray McLeod, not McDonald, is a San Francisco 49er. So a lot of their guys are gone, and they need to readdress the position. They could, and most likely will, sign a free agent wide receiver from between now and the draft, or even after the draft. And I expect them to do that. But I do also expect them to tap into what is a very deep wide receiver class in this upcoming NFL draft. And they love to have young wide receivers on their team. Now, before it was to get to Ben Roethlisberger, the guys, but now you still got to keep that group kind of up here. That's why I think it's interesting to look at all the different rounds and the guys who could fall to the Pittsburgh Steelers at different points.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, Chris, wide receiver is high on the priority list for the Steelers. It's one of those positions. About 50% of the time, almost like every other year, you're going to draft a wide receiver. But this year, it feels like it's really good chance, maybe 50-50 that happens in the first round at pick 20. And then if not there, certainly a really good chance at 52 in the second round. Because as you mentioned, wide receiver is every year, right? It feels like wide receiver and edge rusher are the two deep positions now in every draft class. There's so many talented guys coming out of those groups. There's a handful of guys that you can expect, I think, to be able to come in and have instant impact their rookie seasons. And so, yeah, the Steelers clearly need to add to that room. But I think when you consider what's still available in free agency, what's available in this year's draft class, I don't think certainly there's any time to panic or worry yet.
Certainly, and there's not. So that's why we're going to step back and have a little bit of fun and pick guys for each round. Now, let's get right down to it. I'm going to start with mine, Wes. We're gonna lead with this, and let's do the adjustment on the screen here for our YouTube listeners. Bang, or our YouTube viewers, excuse me. So, okay. I'm going to go with here. Now, if you're watching on YouTube, you're seeing the graphics. But if you're not watching on YouTube, I went with, again, we're going for all the Steelers picks. They have the first round at 20, second round at 52, third at 84, fourth, the comp pick at 138, sixth round, the pick they got from Melvin Ingram at 208, and then 2 seventh-round picks. So I started off the draft with a guy that felt to me that I think that a lot of Steelers fans would like, Chris Olave from Ohio State, speedster, this guy just runs out the box. You see him jump out the box. He has great hands. You saw him with Garrett Wilson light it up. If you got either one of those receivers in your NFL draft in your first round, you're probably really happy right now. Again, I'm not sold that the Steelers are definitely going in the first round, but if a guy like Olave is sitting there in the first round, I don't think any Steelers fan would complain about getting him and adding him to the wide receiver group.
No, I certainly would not. He might be my number one choice for the Steelers there at pick 20, honestly. I like how your first 2 rounds fell much better than mine, Chris, because I think the Steelers wide receiver room needs speed. You know, Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool can do a lot of different things, but one area that they both kind of lack is just that pure breakaway, stretch the field speed.
Yes.
And Chris Olave has the potential to be that guy. I love that, and if that is the way it works out for the Steelers, I certainly would not be disappointed.
In the second round, a guy who I picked, I was surprised he fell this far because he tested extremely well at the combine. He comes from North Dakota State, not a tiny school, but not a Power 5 school. And that's Christian Watson, a guy who some people are saying could be the next Randy Moss of the NFL with the way that he plays. There's a lot of excitement around him. I truly think that he's one of the reasons, one of the examples. You don't need to draft in the first round this year, because if you can get a guy like that in the second round and still address the defense in the first round or get a quarterback, if that's where you're trying to go for, you'd be very happy with him. So I like the way both of those guys fell for the Steelers in this mock draft. We both use Pro Football Focus for our mocks. But these were these are playmakers, and the Steelers need a guy who could stretch the field. Both these guys run sub 4.4s. Both these guys, have the burner speed to stretch the field. That's what I really think the Steelers need in this NFL draft. They need a guy who's going to change the field and is going to stretch the field for Mitch Trubisky to throw those deep bombs. And then that way, Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool, if they're working underneath routes, they're easier to target. And the same thing goes for Pat Freiermuth, and it also helps out Najee Harris.
100%. Again, that feels like the one area of the offense. If you want to go a little sunshine and rainbows, right? But quarterback play should be improved. Offensive line should be improved. Because of those two things in tandem, automatically your run game should be better. You've got solid wide receivers in Deontay and Chase Claypool. Pat Freiermuth, you feel really good about him coming back. Zach Gentry has shown he belongs as a solid number 2 tight end. You need that burner, Chris. You need that guy that can stretch the field. And yeah, I tell you what, Olave or Watson, either one. If you're telling me right now the Steelers come away with either one of those guys, I think mission accomplished in that regard. That really is. It feels like the one piece of this offense that still is a glaring need. Now we could talk about Mitch Trubisky, right, and his credentials and all that all day, but if you remove that from the equation and you think that they at least have a guy who's competent there at quarterback, that ability to stretch the field feels like the one thing that this offense would still clearly need. And both of those guys for you fit that billing for sure. I'd sign up right now to walk away with one of those two in the first round.
Certainly. And the other guys that I drafted here before we switch to Wes's draft in the next segment, the other guys I drafted here, Romeo Doubs, a guy who is another burner type of candidate, except he's 6'2". He has that size with it, but he's a guy
upside with him.
Right, exactly. Like he's not a guy that you're definitely picking him in the third round, maybe even the fourth round. I've seen him go in some mocks. But he would be a guy who could, you could put on the field. Another guy could stretch the field. And again, you're not paying as much as the first 2 rounds.
In his game.
I like that comparison because he has the speed and he has to put a lot more together. Like he's shown ability in his ability to get separation and to run routes, but he could sharpen them a bit. And that's one thing that I like about his game is that, there's that upside. And then other guys, Jalen Nailor, Kyle Phillips. Phillips was my fourth round pick at 138. Nailor was the 6th round pick. Both of them are more like slot type quick guys that are also returners, because that's another factor that Steelers have to consider here. I know they went and signed Gunnar What's-His-Face from the Patriots.
Olszewski.
I didn't want to mess that name up. But with Gunnar Olszewski, when they got him, he is a return man. But Mike Tomlin always loves to have his return man also fill other spots on the roster. Wouldn't hurt to get a guy who could do that in the NFL draft, especially if you haven't addressed wide receiver by the 4th or 6th round. So those are my guys there. I also picked Trey Turner and of Virginia Tech, and Malachi Carter of Georgia Tech in the 7th round. We're going to come right back here and go over Wes's picks to talk about here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, I got to talk to you guys about BetOnline.net. It's that time of the year again as the Final Four is upon us. If you missed out on all the great college basketball action, there's still chances for money to be made by going to BetOnline.net. They have all the latest odds, contests, and player props, and BetOnline.net is the #1 source for all your sports betting needs and info. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just college basketball, it's the NBA, it's the NHL, it's Major League Baseball, because that's starting up soon. It's UFC, it's boxing, it's all things sports wagering and all your sports betting needs with information. There's also live betting, and you can play your favorite Vegas casino games right on betonline.net. So head to their website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action at BetOnline, where the game starts. Back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Wes Uhler, going over our all wide receiver mock draft. So like I said, I got Olave and Watson, and we got, I think that's a good picks there. Now, Wes, we're going to bring up your picks right here in a second to go over who you got here. I want to see what you ended up with. Now, these are some different picks here. Pretty much all
worked out well. I was going to say, it worked out well for us in that regard. We didn't have any overlapping here.
Right. This wasn't any planning. This was, I said, hey, Wes, can you do an all wide receiver mock draft? You say, yep. So
I said, Pro Football Focus. All right, bet.
We knocked it out in a couple minutes here, but we've talked a lot about the prospects in this draft. You started off with, I think, what could someone consider a controversial pick in Treylon Burkes out of Arkansas. Now, Burkes was a guy going into the combine that everyone was like, yeah, he's going first round. He's going top 15.
Debo Samuel comparisons.
Right. A lot of comparisons to him. But then he ran like in the 4.5s in the 40-yard dash. And a lot of people were like, hey, wait a second. What's that? Now, he's another guy. He's bigger. He's 6'2". He's 225. He has that kind of profile. What do you think about the Steelers if they added him to the mix? What would his chemistry be like with a Claypool and a Johnson?
Yeah. So see, I want to be clear here. If I'm drafting from a blank slate wide receiver room, right? If this is, Madden style fantasy draft and you're starting from scratch, I would love to get Treylon Burkes. But when I consider what the Steelers have, I don't love my pick of Treylon Burkes there. He was just clearly the best player. When the way my mock draft simulator fell, Olave was gone, Garrett Wilson was gone. Jameson Williams was gone, right? Those speedy guys that I would prefer for this Steelers offense were not on my board. And so with that, I considered clearly Treylon Burkes was the best guy available. But that's the thing. He is kind of a similar skill set to Chase Claypool.
Yeah.
Again, I think you could argue that there's more potential there with Burkes, but there's some similarities there. He is not Trey Burkes is not the take the top off the defense guy. He's just not. He could be a very good wide receiver in the National Football League. If he, obviously if he is similar to a Debo Samuel, I think just about every team in the NFL would sign up to have a guy like that on their team. I like Trey Burkes, even with, like Chris mentioned correctly, him not having the best weeks to, measurements wise and numbers wise at the combine. I don't know how he would fit with the Steelers. I really don't. I don't think he is what they need, while he would still be a good football player. But like I said, the burner guys there, Olave, Wilson, Williams, they were gone for me. And so it was pretty clearly to me just, okay, Treylon Burkes is the best wide receiver left, so I'm going to take that guy here at 20.
That's right. But
I would much rather have Olave. Like your first round pick, I would much rather have Olave for the Steelers.
So just looking at how things played out, I just want to be clear. With Treylon Burkes there, that means that, like you said, Olave was gone, Wilson was gone.
Yep, and Williams was gone as well.
Jameson Williams was the other one that was also gone. So
I think Drake London was gone on mine too, but I wouldn't necessarily label him as one of those burner guys.
Right, he's not he's a big guy. He's 6'5", so he's huge. Yeah. But like
Treylon Burkes and Skyy Moore were the top 2 wide receivers on the board when I had the 20th pick there, and I'm not taking Skyy Moore that early.
Right, and that's the thing. It's like you're taking there. What about a Jahan Dotson? Because he was a guy before the draft process. I think a lot of people just labeled as a first round pick, and he's kind of slipped back to early second round.
Yeah. No, he was he was maybe the other one that I considered there with Burkes. I like Dotson. I do. I think he's got the speed element to his game. You watch him, he's great at that. We hear at nauseum, right, how important combat catch ability is in the National Football League in the modern era. He's got that. He knows how to high point a ball. He knows how to come down with a football. I think, too, though, that a lot of what he does best, you already have represented in Deontay Johnson and in Chase Claypool. That's why, again, it wasn't necessarily available to me there at pick 20, but I am 100% leaning towards these burner guys. And Dotson, while he's faster than Burkes, certainly, I don't know if I would label him as a pure burner guy. He's got some of that to his game, but I don't know if it would necessarily be, like Olave, like Wilson, where you bring him in week 1 and all of a sudden he's taking the top off that defense and he's contributing. But I am very interested. I am very intrigued by Jahan Dotson, and I do think he is, I mentioned at the start of this episode how it feels like there's a handful of guys, wide receivers in this draft that can come in and have an instant impact right away as rookies. He does seem like that guy. I'm looking for unlike pieces.
Right.
I'm not looking for what the Steelers already have. I'm looking for somebody that brings a different
add diversity.
I don't need what I already have in my toolbox. I'm looking to acquire some new tools. I need some new power tools, Mr. Carter. and so yeah, that's again, I didn't love how the first round fell for me here. But that could be the case for the Steelers, and then you go somewhere else with the first round and you look to get back in the second.
I think that's the biggest point. This is why I've been saying don't commit to any position, and this is why we're doing this just for fun.
This is hypothetical.
Yeah, these are all hypotheticals just to look at what value could be there. But say Treylon Burkes is the best receiver on the board at that point, and you're saying you don't want him in the first round. That means, but if 4 receivers have been taken, again, the corners are bumping down, the defensive tackles are bumping down, the linebackers are bumping. Whoever you want to pick at.
Maybe quarterbacks too.
Maybe quarterbacks too. That's certainly a part here. Now let's get back to Wes's picks here. Second round, you went Justyn Ross from Clemson here. Another guy that can kind of jump out of the stadium. He has really strong hands. Guy at Clemson. I've seen a lot of different gradings for Justyn Ross. I've seen him as a second round guy. I've seen him as a third or something, even would say fourth round guy. People want to see more out of him, as far as that they think that he has short area quickness, and he has the ability to separate, but it's not consistent there. But what makes him a second round guy in your book?
Again, this is another one like the player Justyn Ross. Don't love the fit for the Steelers, but that's just the way my Pro Football Focus board fell to me in my mock draft. Again, I much prefer where Chris was able to go with this to me, because Justyn Ross, 6'4", I think he is. He's got a nose for the football. He's led Clemson in receptions in a bunch of different statistical categories. He was their most targeted receiver. He was the guy amongst that position group for Clemson. Not a lot of explosive elements to his game, though. And again, if I'm the Steelers, and I am the Steelers here in this hypothetical scenario, I'm looking for explosiveness. I'm looking for burners. And again, I realize I didn't really come away with that in my own draft. So do as I say, not as I do. But a guy who's 6'4", over 200 pounds, he 100% can carve out a role for himself in any offense. But I'm admitting that I am kind of hustling backwards against myself, because I've talked about the need for the ability to take the top off the defense, an explosive wide receiver, and I do realize that Justyn Ross and Treylon Burkes aren't the best fits for that billing.
And your next pick was David Bell out of Purdue, a guy who going into the draft process, I think a lot of people were excited to see. I don't think he ran the 40-yard dash that people want him to want, but he's a guy who looks like a better route runner. When you watch his tape, he looks like a guy that he can win deep. He has hands that that can just snatch a ball out of the sky. And I think that's something that you want here too, because also, you look at the problems the Steelers have had this year. As much as we're talking about burners, Deontay Johnson has drop problems. Chase Claypool has drop problems. They would like a receiver who just catches the ball.
And that's what David Bell does. 4.6 40 time. So again, I'm being a pretty big hypocrite here in this exercise. All right. Blame Pro Football Focus and not me. All right. That's what I'm saying. But you're absolutely right. he's a guy who struggles a little bit in separation. Again, just doesn't have that pure burner speed, twitchiness, whatever term you want to use. Struggles a little bit in separation. But other than that, my goodness, I think you got to like pretty much everything about his game. He is consistent. He is reliable. He, I think, fits into an offense that wants to run the football a lot. He's got the skill set to be solid on the outside at blocking. And he is a guy who just, since he was an 18-year-old freshman at Purdue, he's produced every single year. He's not one of these guys who just had one really good year and there's not a ton to go off of. I think he is a solid, this is a perfect fit for David Bell. Third round, a guy who, I think has a lot of characteristics that a lot of other teams would be in love with. Again, doesn't necessarily fit the best with what the Steelers need, but David Bell, maybe there's some like Kenny Pickett, I think, comparisons just in the sense of really high floor. I don't know how high the ceiling is, but I believe that he's going to be able to have a long NFL career. Might not ever be a superstar, might not ever be a first-team All-Pro, but he's going to be a guy I think that can play into his second and third contracts and stay in the league a long time because doesn't have the explosiveness, but just about everything else, he's not great at getting separation, but just about everything else, he's checking all those boxes.
Now let's go over your last few picks like a one big brushstroke here.
Sure.
If I was one from them, I've always liked Bo Melton. I thought he had a strong Senior Bowl.
Me too.
I've also talked to his former wide receiver coach from Rutgers because now he's the current wide receiver coach at Pitt, Tyquan Underwood, and he had a lot of things to say about Bo Melton's character as far as like how he worked and how he developed as a 4-year player at Rutgers, and he'd be one of those guys I was talking about, Wes, shifty, quicker, more of a punt returner, kick returner type of guy who you can kind of put back there and say you're the new Ray McCloud, maybe with more of an upside because you're a late round draft pick compared to an undrafted guy. I think there's an upside to him, but if you had to pick one guy out of this group, not just because Josh Johnson with your 4th round pick, but if there's one guy that kind of intrigues you for the value and what he might have an upside here, who is it in this group? Sorry, I just took it down for you.
It's hard not to say Josh Johnson. I mean, that's the reason that he was the highest pick of the group, right? And I think Josh Johnson is weird in the sense of a lot of football evaluators have him as like a 6th, 7th round, like bottom of the barrel. A lot of people have him as the sleeper of this wide receiver class. I think that was kind of Skyy Moore for a while, but I don't know if you could call Skyy Moore a sleeper anymore.
Not anymore. No, everyone's on to that game.
Exactly. And you know what, too? Josh Johnson, a lot of the comps that you read, people compare him to one Antonio Brown.
Oh,
Similar body type, similar ability to get separation.
Oh, boy.
And so, again, while my first 3 picks, Chris, I don't think really fit the best guys available on the board, and that's why I took them. I don't think they specifically fit the Steelers' needs. I do think Josh Johnson would do that. I think you could say the same about Bo Melton. I liked Ontario Drummond, and but I do hesitate in the sense of, there's some air raid elements to that offense. What they were doing there with Joe Webby, and obviously under Lane Kiffin, and Webby is off to Oklahoma now to run that offense for Brent Venables. They spread the ball out. They're able to get the most out of any wide receivers in that system. So that always gives me a little pause. But Slade Bolden's another one too, Chris. Out of Alabama, I'll always take a flyer on those guys.
They produce a lot of them.
They produce a lot of them, and I thought, held his own, when he was asked to fill in down the stretch when Alabama just had a lot of attrition at that position. But I'm going to go Josh Johnson. I know that's the easy answer because he's the highest pick, but he's quick. He's not straight line fast, right? But he's that classic twitchy. He's got the ability to get separation. He's like really good at manipulating space and using his hands. And I think that's important in the NFL because it's the old adage, there's a big difference between college open and NFL open. And when you've got the ability to create space, to manipulate space and use your hands like he does, I think that translates well to the next level.
I think that's certainly an interesting factor there. The Steelers are going to consider all factors when they're picking their wide receivers this year. And I'm telling you, they're going to pick a wide receiver.
100%.
So be prepared. That is coming at some point. It just depends. 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 6th, 7th. That's where it depends on
top
where
top 3 rounds, I'm saying.
I'd agree. I'd say by the end of day 2, the Steelers have a new wide receiver to their room, and everyone's talking about what if he can become the next number 1 on the team. So we're done talking about that. Thanks for participating and checking out our wide receiver draft. But we got one more thing to talk about because Tyrann Mathieu had an interesting something to say about the Steelers and Mike Tomlin. We'll talk about that right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast after this. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Wes Uhler on a Thursday edition of the Locked On Steelers podcast. So, Wes, Tyrann Mathieu has been the talk of Steelers Nation ever since they got done signing everybody, and he was let go by the Chiefs, and he's been a free agent, and he's been posting about, he's been posting all these cryptic messages about, got to work harder than everybody else, God's plan, and stuff like, things that athletes do when they're a free agent. They're just trying to kind of figure things out.
Just a bunch of Drake lyrics, right?
Exactly. Just Drake lyrics that make you think like, oh, he's deep. No, he's just tweeting stuff right now, man. But
no, his phone's just on shuffle and he decided to put it out there.
That's basically what that is. But there is a lot of excitement around, Tyrann Mathieu becoming a Pittsburgh Steeler. That the strong safety position is the one position that they don't have a surefire starter positioned at right now on the roster. Terrell Edmonds is still a free agent. There's still Landon Collins out there. I think DeMonte Kazee is still out there. Keanu Neal is still out there. There's all sorts of options. Now, I did talk about this earlier in the week when Kevin Colbert came out and said, we're not, we typically want to sign a guy that's fresh off or as close to being as fresh off of their first contract as possible. Yes. That kind of ruled out Honey Badger because he's 30. He's going to be he's well after his first year contract, and really you probably look, he has 2 or 3 more years of his prime in him to play. But Steelers fans look at, hey, you know what? He's been a superstar. He's been a guy that's been compared to Minkah Fitzpatrick in years past. Why not get that guy? And on the Jordy Culotta show, another podcast out there, I believe he's an LSU guy. He brought on Tyrann Mathieu, and on there he said that Mike Tomlin had spoke to him and called him up. So it's clear there is an interest there. Now, whether that interest is more than just Mike Tomlin kicking the tires there and just seeing how Tyrann Mathieu might be feeling about a situation, or if this is the Steelers just, hey, letting you know we're interested. If you're interested, we'll rock. What do you think about this development? Are you surprised that he said this, or is this just this thing? It's like, this don't really rock my boat that much. The Steelers are sticking to a plan. It's going to be, if he wants to come on a great deal, awesome. But they're waiting to see who's the best value that they can get.
I like that. This doesn't rock my boat too much. In this business, right, Chris? Everyone always says, "Does that move the needle?" But I like that for you. Does that rock you? No. And here's why. Mike Tomlin is, I think, maybe chief most amongst all the 32 football coaches, head coaches in the National Football League, the one who cares the most about relationships. And to me, him reaching out to Tyrann Mathieu is the same as him having dinner with all these different people ahead of the NFL draft. Mike Tomlin met with Patrick Mahomes ahead of that NFL draft too. This is what Mike Tomlin does. He is a relationships guy. He's talked about it. That's why he's at every pro day, because you can really meet these guys at their pro days. Their families there, their agents there. Not that their agents aren't at the combine, but at the combine, these guys are herded almost like cattle from place to place, from event to event. It's very regimented. They're very, out of their comfort zone and almost going through the motions in a lot of ways, just trying to not mess up and just trying to get to the end without ruining their NFL chances. The combine is a much different atmosphere and vibe than pro day. At pro day, you're in someone's backyard at their facility. Their parents are on the sideline. Their old college teammates are standing there. The entire coaching staff is around. The cafeteria staff is right there in the facility too. You can really get to know a guy and where he comes from and what he's all about. And that's why Mike Tomlin is at all these pro days and loves him so much, because he's a relationship guy. Right. And that's what I thought when I heard he reached out to Tyrann Mathieu. I don't put a ton of stock into that. And I know Steeler Nation, believe me, I get it. We have not seen this type of offseason from the Steelers in a long time. Now, I do know over the last 5 years or so, the Pittsburgh Steelers have been much more active in free agency than they had been historically. But this has been I mean, 6 signings already for the Steelers?
Yeah.
This has been, they've spent more money. They've been more active. They brought in some names like Trubisky and Jack, bigger names and a lot of intrigue around those guys. I understand the intrigue with Tyrann Mathieu. He's one of the best safeties of this generation. He's been a phenomenal player. He's been a blast to watch and root for, dating back to his time at LSU when he coined that nickname, the Honey Badger, when he came to Morgantown and made the most athletic play I've ever seen a dude make, tipped the ball to himself, faked out Geno Smith, tipped the ball to himself, caught it, juked out Tavon Austin, and scored a pick 6 right in front of me. It was ridiculous. But there's some collecting football cards for the people who are really screaming for Tyrann Mathieu. Is Tyrann Mathieu a better player than Edmonds? Yeah. Is Tyrann Mathieu a better player than Neal? Yeah. But I think those guys are probably a better fit for what the Steelers need them to do. It's not always about having the best players, Chris. It's about having the right ones. And I think there's too much similarities in the games of Tyrann Mathieu and Minkah Fitzpatrick. I'm not saying I don't think it would work or it could work. I just think that there's better jelly options for that peanut butter that is Minkah Fitzpatrick.
I hear you.
You're not looking to make a sandwich just with the best ingredients in the world. You're trying to make the best sandwich, right? And that might involve some onion or some tomato or some mayonnaise, right? And not necessarily a bunch of different similar cold cuts. I don't know where I'm going with that, but Tyrann Mathieu, I understand.
You're running out of metaphors.
I understand the intrigue. He is without a doubt just the best pure safety that is left on the board. But left in free agency, pardon me. But when you consider his age and his skill set, I don't know if either of those things mesh with the type of guys that the Steelers are typically trying to sign and the type of guy that would fit best with Minkah Fitzpatrick. So I would rather have Edmonds. I would rather have Keanu O'Neal. I honestly would. And I know that that's not popular, but that's just the X's and O's side of it for me.
Yeah, I feel you on that. I look at that and I say, like, man, because if you get Mathieu, you give another guy who can float around like Minkah Fitzpatrick, and then you could still draft a safety who can play the Terrell Edmonds role.
Could.
And I think, but at the same time, you can also get Edmonds at a cheaper price and draft a safety who kind of fills that role that we're talking about with Tyrann Mathieu and not pay the Tyrann Mathieu price. So I look at that and I see there are a ton of possibilities here, but I'm right with you. I think this is simply just Mike Tomlin calling. He called up Tyrann Mathieu. Probably called up a lot of other free agents too, just to see what's going on, test the water. But that's why at the NFL Pro Bowl, people said, "Hey, Mike Tomlin, that's the guy I'd want to play for if I wasn't playing for my current team." So it doesn't shock me that happened. I don't think it should be made nearly as big of a story. Because what happened? This is what happens at this time of the year when there's no games to play. Everyone wants to hype everything up.
Right.
But I do think that the Steelers, they're going to stay the course. If the honey bad, because I'm sure the Steelers have given him an offer, and it's like, hey, this is going to be less money than what the Cowboys or whoever else is offering you money. This is going to be less money than these guys. But you're going to come play next to Minkah Fitzpatrick. You're going to play for Mike Tomlin, Brian Flores,
behind
Watt,
Cam Hayward and TJ Watt. Yeah.
Like that, you're going to have all this going for you. If you want to be part of a great defense, you can be part of a great defense. And I'm pretty sure that offer is on the table. It's just more so if Tyrann Mathieu wants to go that route. And I think once he does choose, whether it is the Steelers, the Cowboys, or someone else. I heard the Raiders were another team that could have been in that mix. Then I do think the Steelers will be like, all right, they'll call up Terrell Edmonds, or he might be Terrell Edmonds himself might be waiting to see how much money does Honey Badger get, because that's what Edmonds is trying to get at 25 years old. He's trying to figure out how much he can get paid right now. This is his first time on the market, and he hasn't had it doesn't seem like he has all the suitors he wants right now.
No, it does not. But you know what? That is quite often how free agency works out. Like there's this first wave, and then there's the second wave, right? And Edmonds is far from the only young in his prime guy that's still available out there that you would have thought would have been nabbed by somebody at this point. But yeah, I'll be very interested to see what Tyrann Mathieu does. If he signs a lower, 1 or 2 year deal with the Steelers, then it's pretty clear his priority is to win. Maybe you could say the same thing about the Cowboys as well too, a team that was in the postseason last year. But if he is looking in himself and in the mirror at age 30 and he's saying, okay, realistically, this is probably my last opportunity to cash in on a contract, I want to get paid. I want to maximize my earning potential because this is probably going to be the last big deal that I sign in my career. Maybe I'll sign another deal or two, but it's not going to be like this at age 30, coming off the last couple years that I've had. That's what I'd like to, be a fly on the wall in Tyrann Mathieu's room and know, does he really want to try and contend for the next year or two while he's still in his prime, or at least, on the tail end of it? Or is he trying to just maximize, this is my last big contract and I want to maximize that earning potential? I do think we'll know the answer to that here pretty soon.
I do think we'll know it soon. When we do, we'll see if it's the Steelers. You'll hear from me right here on Breaking News segment. We'll talk about it for the next episode. And if he doesn't, we'll see how that impacts the rest of the safety market. But Wes, thanks so much for joining us here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. It's always fun to have you here. Let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Yes, sir. I'm a host for Steelers Nation Radio, Steelers Blitz at noon on SNR. You can get that on iHeart and on Steelers.com. Also, Steelers Blitz with Arthur Moats. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts as well, too. Just Steelers Blitz wherever you get your podcasts. And Ears and Beers, like Chris said, if you're one of the tortured Mountaineer souls like me and Crowley, come listen to us there. We're still pumping those out. Even though football and hoops are over, still plenty to discuss. So that's where you can get at me on Twitter at Wesley Uhler.
Always do check him out. Wes does great work. You can find me, Chris Carter, on the Locked On Steelers podcast Monday through Friday on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. Hit the like button on this video if you enjoyed it. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit the subscribe button to our channel to get all of our daily content, including those breaking news updates that we do when they happen. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Thanks so much for checking out the show. Rate us 5 stars with a positive comment on Apple Podcasts to help us out. We're back tomorrow, finishing up your week. Jenna Harner's back. We want to get her thoughts on the Pittsburgh Steelers coming up tomorrow right here on the podcast.